Hello, welcome back to another live stream. Here we're bringing you today another hard day's work on the ranch. I want to give people a few minutes to tune in and just give a little bit of a introduction and to give you some updates about what is going on with state parks and how can you access them. So currently, the parks remain open. Wilder Ranch is open for the trail access, but the parking lot is closed and there's no vehicular traffic allowed into the park. However, if you are entering the park by bike or walking or running, that is allowed. The beaches currently are closed from 11 to 5 p.m. with the exception of water sports. So you can go out into the water to recreate, but you can't hang out on the beaches. There's no congregation of people on the beaches, so that's the one caveat to that. The next thing I want to kind of just tell you about is just where we are right now. You're wondering where I am. This is called the Machine Shop. This is a building that has been here for a very long time. It was originally built like mid-1800s, but was rebuilt in 1896. And above us is the bunkhouse where the 16 ranch hands would have lived. So right now we're standing in this is the cultural preserve at Wilder Ranch. And it's preserved some really incredible old buildings, historic buildings. But we know that the history goes back much, much further than just the time the Wilders were here. And so I did want to take just a moment to have a land acknowledgement for the indigenous people that have lived here for thousands of years and continue to be stewards of this land to this day. And I'm talking about the Awaswas-speaking Yupi people who lived and stewarded this land for millennia and are still actively involved in the management and stewardship of this land today. And if you'd like to learn a bit more about their efforts and how they're involved, I highly recommend looking up the Amamutsun Tribal Band. You could find their website online and they've got some incredible resources. So we want to do our best to continue their traditions of preservation and stewardship and take lessons from those times. Now, I do want to shift back then to today, where we are right now, and back into the machine shop. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of what was happening in here. And this really was like the heart and the soul of the ranch. It's what made this place what a productive operation it was. And if you've ever been to Wilder Ranch or you've seen any of our other programs, we really like to tell about how ingenuitive the Wilders were. And I'm going to be talking today about the acquisition of a new product for the Wilders, and that was something called the Pelton wheel. I want to talk a little bit about the history and development of that wheel, and also how it was implemented here. And I'm going to try my best to get a little bit into the physics of how it works. So we're going to dive right in, and in case you're just joining in, my name is Sky, and I'm an interpreter here, and I'm joined today by Rewa, who will be answering your comments. If you write anything, she can answer for you. If you've tuned into any of our programs in the last 4 weeks, you've seen Rewa's programs, and they've been really incredible, and I'm happy to still have her help fielding questions today. So, as I said, the Wilders were incredibly innovative, inventive, ingenuitive. They always had the latest technology and gadgets, and that was in their personal lives, but it was also in the machinery that they would use to operate their creamery, because we are standing on a historic dairy ranch. So Dee Dee Wilder had the newest stuff, and what I'm going to show you today is a water wheel, but you might be thinking, well, water wheels are nothing new, right? Actually, the first water wheel, the first document we have of a water wheel was 4000 BC. So 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years we've had at least the concept of a water wheel. At that time, we were talking about a horizontal water wheel. So you could picture a stream, and the water wheel is going to turn with the stream. It's a very inefficient way to capture energy, but it was the first way we started developing that. And it took about another 2,000 years until a Roman engineer named Vitruvius came up with the design for a vertical water wheel. And that's what we think of. When you think of a water wheel, usually that would be the image you'd conjure up in your head of that kind of classic looking water wheel that would spin with its big paddles along a river. And that would be more efficient than, say, the horizontal water wheel. But there was still a long way for improvement to go. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit closer to the time of the Wilders and talk a little bit about the difference between the two main types of water wheels, and that would have been a reaction turbine and an impulse turbine. So when we think about a reaction turbine, that's the same thing. That's what Vitruvius would have developed. That's what we think of when we think of those kind of classic mill-style European water wheels. Big paddles, water's pushing through it, and the way energy is transferred in that design is that the water is going to push the paddle and then push through, and it's going to capture some of that energy. Now, you can also think that's the same as a wind turbine. Wind is going to push the blades, and that's going to make the blades spin. So that's the first type of wheel, and that's pretty intuitive to think about. It's also, when you think about the landscape that was developed, makes some sense. When we think about Europe or the east coast of the US, there's ample supplies of water. You've got these large, wide streams. And with a reaction turbine, the more water you have pressing up, pushing on those paddles or those blades, the more energy you're going to be able to transfer. So off of a big wide stream with big wide paddles, you would be able to harness a decent amount of energy. The way an impulse turbine is different and a little bit harder to wrap, at least for me, to wrap my head around. But the idea is that rather than just the water pushing it, the energy you're getting is from basically slowing down that water from the bouncing off. So what you need is a very concentrated, high velocity stream of water. Now when we think about the Western landscape, that's going to fit a lot better and starts to fill into this story of how it would have been developed out on the frontier. Now, while the idea of the reaction turbine might have worked back, on the East Coast, back in New England, maybe even in parts of the Midwest, when we're out in the West where it's pretty dry and water sources are limited, we need to come up with new designs, and that's where this new innovation was born. So the idea of this concentrated stream of water bouncing off was what started the impulse turbines or impulse wheels. So I want to talk about an innovation and the man himself, and this is a man named Lester Allen Pelton. Lester Allen Pelton was born in Ohio, and in the mid-1800s he came out to California, like many, seeking his fortune, seeking gold, and found his fortune in another way, and that was as an inventor. So mid-1800s, he comes out to California, he's working on mills, and he's observing these impulse turbines, which had been around already. And his invention is one that came out of an accidental observation, and it's kind of a cool story. So he's observing this impulse turbine and it's spinning, and one of the blades or one of the paddles actually slips off, so it becomes offset and misaligned. And to his surprise, now that it's misaligned, the water is no longer hitting the center of the cup, but rather the edge. And with this misalignment, he observes that the wheel begins spinning faster. So it's actually using the energy more efficiently. So he takes that observation and he starts his own experiments. He uses what was called a Knight wheel or Knight turbine, which was developed up also in California in the Sutter Creek. So a nearby mill, he takes this idea, and the way that one worked is you had the concentrated flow of water, and then it dropped into a single bucket. And that bucket that was at an angle would have been more efficient than just hitting like the center. So it would hit the side. So there were already, the idea was already coming around, and Pelton was the one who fine-tuned it. So what he did is he took a splitter and then had two buckets. And now that concentrated stream of water is going to hit that splitter, and it's going to bounce off on both sides. And rather than the water just bouncing out, or bouncing to the center of the cup, it's going to bounce in two directions to both edges of the cup and make contact both times. So you're making more contact rather than the water just being lost, that energy being lost. So I have behind me, this is the original Pelton wheel from Wilder Ranch. And you can see there's a casing around it. But we have another example, and I'll show you that just so you kind of have a visual of what I'm talking about. So you've got these paddles here, or you got these cups. See how there's two cups in each one. There we go. And you can see how they're split in the middle. So the water would hit the middle and bounce off onto the edges of the cups along with in the middle of the cups. And that would spin this wheel. So Pelton took this design, and in 1880, he patented it. And by 1888, he formed a company, Pelton Water Wheel Company, based out of San Francisco. And just 1 year later, D.D. Wilder, as I said, he liked the new things, 1889 buys his own first Pelton wheel. So they had only been around for 1 year, so it really was the latest tech, the latest innovation. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about how Pelton's wheel captured that energy more efficiently. And I do ask for your patience on this, as physics was not my best subject, but I'm going to do my best to try and break this down in a way that is understandable. So I want us to think, if you can follow with me here, rather than talking about a water wheel or just water hitting a wheel, let's think about us kicking a soccer ball at a wheel. So we're going to kick a soccer ball at these paddles, and what the law of conservation of energy tells us is if we kick the ball at the paddle, the amount of energy that's going to be gained by the paddle is going to be equal to the amount of energy that is lost by the ball. So as the ball hits the paddle, it's going to bounce off. So the speed of the ball hitting the wheel is going to be less than the speed or the velocity of the bounce back. And if we think about the difference between the velocity that the ball approaches the wheel and the velocity of the ball as it leaves the wheel, that difference is going to be the amount of energy that was transferred from the ball to the wheel. So the more that we can slow down the ball, the more that we can gain energy for the wheel, right? So our goal here is to have a high velocity and slow it down as much as we can. Now, there's one other just principle I wanted to throw out there, and that would be Newton's second law of motion. So the idea that in this case, the momentum gained by the paddle is going to be equal to the momentum that is lost by the ball. Now, the more time that the ball is in contact with the paddle, the more energy that will be transferred. So that means that we want to increase the amount of contact time between these two surfaces so that we increase the amount of energy transfer, or in this case, motion transfer. So now let's think about how that applies to the water wheel. So the water wheel is going to, we're going to be hitting these the cups here. All right, there we go. And it's going to hit the center here. So rather than just bouncing off, remember we're going to have this very high velocity water flow that's going to hit it. Rather than it just kind of bouncing off and spittling off and us losing that, it's going to hit this center and it's going to split that. Now let's think about that. It's like it split the soccer ball in half, and now it's actually going to bounce off of two of these paddles, both edges. So what you get from that is, rather than, you're going to get more of that energy transfer because you're going to be slowing it down more. Now, when the water hits the splitter, it's going to slow it down. But then when that water bounces off of the splitter and hits the edge of the cups, it's going to slow down that water even more. So by having that additional contact, you're gaining that energy efficiency that otherwise would be lost if the water just bounced off of the paddle. So that was one of the main ideas that Pelton would have been working off of when he came up with this design. Now, if we think about to Newton's law, the other thing you want is, you want as long of a contact as you can. So this double contact is going to be longer than a single contact. So the Pelton wheel achieves, in a way that hadn't been done before, the most efficient way to take something that is high velocity, that stream of water, and slow it down as much as you can. And if we think about that energy transfer, right, the more we change the velocity, the more we slow down the flow of the water, the more energy we take out of to the paddles. So we want as high velocity of a flow of water as we can, and we want to slow it down as much as we can, and we can do that with the most contact time we can, and we can do that with just trying to bounce it off and back onto the paddle, that second contact. So that's how the physics works, best of my abilities to explain. So where does this leave the Wilder? So Wilder buys this Pelton wheel, 1889 he buys it, but the innovative family, the Wilders, it took more than just buying the wheel, because you needed a water source. So what Wilder did is he built a dam and built a reservoir, and he built that just under a mile up a hill from where I'm standing, and it's still there today. And from there, the water would flow, and in that reservoir, which was a little bit, just to visualize the size of it, a little bit smaller than an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So the water is going to flow down. It's going to flow down a little over 200 feet, about 210 feet, and it's going to flow through a narrow pipe, about a 7-inch pipe. And that's all important because we want to think about that you're trying to get as high velocity of water as you can. So you want it to be flowing down far. You want it to be narrow when you think about putting your thumb onto the edge of a hose. You're going to be concentrating that flow of water. And as that water is streamlined down, it's going to come down and flow out with an extremely high velocity. Now that velocity translates into about 95 pounds of pressure, which also converts over to about 20 horsepower. So, which is relatively modest. And if you think about, what was the needs out here, and they were pretty great. I mean, we think about what did this do for the ranch. Now, it operated the machinery in this shop, which I'll just take a little peek around. We've got here a drill press. And here we've got a lathe. And back there we've got a stone grinder. So it operated all this stuff, which if you're one of the 16 ranch hands that lives above us, or would have lived above us, that would have been a real help to you. But it did something more, which is that it created electricity. They were converting that kinetic energy into a form of electricity using an electric dynamo generator. And this was Melvin's invention, and Melvin was D.D. Wilder's son. So that was really incredible because that allowed this to transform from just a small dairy operation into one where they had electricity in a time when the area did not have electricity. And when the creamery could operate using electricity to have machinery that would have given you a really high quality uniform product. So all really key into how they were able to find success out here as a dairy operation for over 100 years. So that's the idea behind the Pelton wheel and why it was so important for the Wilders. And we think about just how they would have had the newest stuff and how something as simple as laws of physics would have influenced the time to create this new invention, and given someone like Lester Allen Pelton, made him his fortune. When he thought he was going to strike gold, he struck gold in knowledge. And another way we can think about too is Pelton came out here and he worked on mills, and at the time the generation of energy for mills was done through steam power. And out on the western frontier, that meant around mills we had some pretty devastating deforestation because you needed incredible volumes of wood to burn so that you could generate that steam to generate power for your mills. So by creating this effective way to harness the limited water resource that was out on the west, he was actually able to save all these forests and has a legacy that goes on today, as Pelton wheels are still one of the choice designs used in hydroelectric electricity generation. So we can look at him as this environmentalist, but of course also, without getting into too much detail, the other environmental costs that would go along with hydroelectric power generation. But really just a incredible story of a man who came out here with nothing, and like many who came to the West, found his fortune, and most times not in the way they thought they would. So what I want to do to end today is I just want to turn on the Pelton wheel because it still does work today, which is just a fantastic thing to think about the quality that they would have used in building things back when the Wilders were here. And I'm just going to turn it on just to show you. And then so the water's still flowing down from that same source up about a little under a mile. And then it's going to flow out through the original adobe piping out to the creek that runs underneath the cow barn. Now, if you join us next week, I want to talk more about the individual machines in this shop. And we're going to be operating the Pelton wheel in a little bit more depth. But I wanted to just this week to talk about, well, how do we actually generate that power? So I hope that you can join us next week for another live stream on Sunday. And until then, please take care, stay safe, and enjoy seeing a piece of machinery over 120 years old still work. Power on! All right, take care.